This is a question openly posed to all Iranians who hate Islam. If your reasoning for hating Islam is what the Islamic Republic has done, can we agree that the Taliban is in all ways more extreme than the Islamic Republic? Then why aren't Afghans against Islam? See, this isn't a question they don't want to answer. In fact, Iranians don't want to talk about Afghans at all. Because if you bring up Afghans with Iranians, then inevitably we have to talk about our ugly racism against them.
Old mate wants to talk about Afghanistan. Okay, and I'm only going to do this once. But first, we don't hate Islam because of the Islamic Republic, or Khomeini, or Khamenei, or the IRGC, or the cardboard flamboyant one. Iranians despise Islam because of what Islam is. Iranians despise Islam because of what Islam has done. Iranians despise Islam because of what Islam continues to do globally, including the West. And Iranians will continue to stand to the death at the front lines of defending free civilization against a set of atrocious ideas that is political Islam. Not a race, not an ethnicity, not a person, but a set of atrocious ideas. Be it the IRGC, Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Al-Qaeda, Daesh, Sunnism, Shiism, or any other single death cult orgy throughout the past 1400 years, you cannot possibly demonstrate that at any point in time in Islamic history there has been a peaceful, non-violent Islam. Not one. Iranians despise Islam because of how the fundamentals of it influences the individual to behave a certain way that is incompatible with classical secular liberalism, seeing as their prophet is often considered as the perfect male figure to aspire to become like, as proclaimed by practicing Muslims themselves. Not the greatest role model, is it? 74 lashes on a woman for singing. This isn't something you simply criticize as a normal government policy in 2026. You obliterate it. Send it back to where it belongs, the 7th century, in a fucking cave. Over 40,000 slaughtered within the space of 48 hours, just in January. Islam. Those same women who were left alive, raped, organs extracted, removal of clitorises, and then killed. Islam. Forced child marriages and all-round coercion. Islam. As for Afghan women, same story. Islam. An exponential influx of real Iranian women's hair into several countries since the January massacre. Whose hair is it? What are the names of these women? Where are they? What happened to their bodies? That's Islam. Over 70% live under the poverty line in one of the most resourceful, culturally and historically rich nations in the world. But even when the Islamic regime is at its weakest point, the number one priority is not appealing to its people or national integrity, but Islamic colonization and expansionism. That's Islam. Hunted down for being of the Baha'i faith. Islam. Hunted down for apostasy, converting to Christianity, or anything else for that matter. Islam. You know what? Just listen to this.
الان میدونین چه حکمی به شما دادن؟ چه حکمی؟ حکم شما محاربه است. خب میشه بگید محاربه چیه لطفا؟ من نمیدونم چیه بابا. اعدام. تو رو خدا اعدام بده. آقا من غلط کردم. گول خوردم. تو رو خدا. با غلط کردن تو چیزی درست میشه؟ به خدا من اونجا بیکار بودم. من جامعه به خدا خطری ندارم. آقا من غلط کردم.
That right there. That sound. I can't get it out of my fucking head. Imagine a young boy sobbing and begging you not to kill him for criticizing a regime. That's Islam. And never forget this one. A father looking for his son amongst the tens of thousands slaughtered, like rag dolls everywhere. Perished. That's Islam. But let me guess, none of these are the real Islam, right? Even though it is word for word verbatim in your doctrine. Infidel women can be used as sexual servitude and then, of course, slain because they're infidels. Just like 1400 years ago in Qadisiyah and Ctesiphon. The exact same playbook. Apparently, it was easier for Islamic militants to shoot down Iranians in January than it was against ISIS members. Because after shooting down an ISIS militant, the IRGC must pray because they're a Muslim. But with an Iranian infidel, it's unnecessary. Just shoot him down. No need to pray. That's Islam. 1400 years, and I'm still trying to find that peaceful Islam you lot refer to so much. Now you mentioned Afghanistan, so let's talk about Afghanistan, boy.
In fact, Iranians don't want to talk about Afghans at all.
In fact, it seems we're the only ones talking about Afghans right now. Are you? You've been awfully silent about what's happening there right now, mate. Surely you care about the treatment of Afghan women more than defending the Islamic regime, no? Surely you care about indigenous grassroots uprisings against the Islamic occupying Taliban, which is exactly what's happening right now. Speak for yourself, boy. Sure, racism exists just as it exists everywhere in all societies, and it ought to be condemned. But what you're deliberately omitting, which is exactly what you're good at, is not racism, but culturalism. I've always been ardent about two things in life: freedom of expression and culturalism. Don't worry, I'll make it simple for you. He who practices a shitty culture ought to be berated in spite of their race. White, black, brown, yellow, rainbow, unicorn, Afghan, Iranian, Arab, Australian, American, whatever. You practice a shitty culture, you gotta go. Make sense? That's culturalism. Nothing to do with racism. The culture that political Islam inherits is a shitty culture. Nothing to do with race. Because if it did have anything to do with race, then you wouldn't have white Ranga Islamists behaving like 7th century apes. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is a common way that Islamic sympathizers will deflect and guilt trip you into thinking that you're being a racist or a xenophobe. But in reality, if you're critiquing Islamic culture, you're being a culturalist, not a racist. Now, with regards to Afghanistan, you're wrong. Historically, we're the same people. And similar to Iran in the 20th century, Afghanistan was also on the trajectory of industrialization and modernization, particularly with regards to women's rights. The difference in the split pathways over time was several factors, among which Afghanistan had much more political instability and frequent changes in leadership than Iran did. They had much more obstacles. Iran had a relatively stable, centralized rule under Reza Shah the Great and his son, which enabled secularism, progression, and vast industrialization to prevail. Iran's modernization project was much more cohesive. Afghanistan dealt with much more tribal rivalries and periodic coups. Even before the rise of the Taliban, periods of modernization like under the rule of King Amanullah in the 1920s were short-lived due to internal resistance from Islamic figures. Reza Shah took a much harsher, necessary stance against the Islamists. He sorted them out better. Comes the 60s and 70s, Afghanistan was relatively more progressive over time. Women had more freedoms, greater educational opportunities, and secular influence. Fast forward to the Islamo-Marxist interference, in addition to the facilitation of Western governments themselves, just like they did with Iran, here we are today. Again, nothing to do with race, but everything to do with cultural inheritance. The Talib Islamic culture is abhorrent and, historically speaking, not Afghan. Afghan culture is historically rooted in both Zoroastrianism and Buddhism. But you don't want to admit that, do you? At least just admit this, dude. You love the Islamic regime. End of the day, they love you. The only difference is that you can speak eloquently. Mental gymnastics is your expertise, and you happen to know some poetry, which means fuck all when your moral compass is broken. And before you go ahead and block me, just like on X, maybe, just maybe, sit down and have a think. I promise you, Iran will be free from Islamic occupation. Maybe only then you'll understand what Payande Iran and Javid Shah means.